Okay, welcome back everybody to the next session. This morning's we have two speakers for the next session. Geoff Peck, who is founder and chief taxologist at PawPaw Taxology. Geoff's been immersed in enterprise tax solutions at global majors for more than 20 years, with a solid academic background and experience of working across Europe, North America, Middle East, and Africa. Geoff excels as a thought leader and practitioner in planning, architecture, and governance of end-to-end corporate tax systems. Prior to third-party global tax engines, Geoff built 3 tax engines and later founded a boutique consultancy that briefly became the largest in the world dedicated to new age tax technologies. Geoff is the principal author behind the unique Tax Technology Insight series, and a regular blogger, speaker, and advisor to tax and tax technology leadership at major corporations. Lide Mendibil is international VAT manager at Ritchie Brothers. Lide is an experienced VAT specialist with a proven history of managing VAT compliance and advice in internationally present companies. Currently, as the VAT manager for EMEA and APAC for Ritchie Brothers, she's focused on raising awareness on VAT-related processes and systems, business models, and risks. She works closely with cross-functional teams, IT and finance teams, to ensure the growth of the organization is aligned with the indirect tax rules and reporting obligations. She's currently involved in upgrading tax technology knowledge to better contribute to the progress of the organization in this area. And their topic today is Let's Cut to the Chase, a sensible approach to tax in the digital era and what that looks like. Over to you, Geoff.
Thank you, June. So I believe as a tax professional that technology and digitalization are fundamentally changing the rules of the game in tax, and that there is an urgent need for tax practitioners to become more digitally aware, tech savvy, and data literate. And I am a stand for a tax profession that shows up to this challenge in the right way, with massively boosted insights, knowledge, and know-how in this space. So now I think that's a pretty big statement, and I know it would be great to think, well, we're tax, this is our industry, so we're in control. But actually, when it comes to digitalization, I believe this is proving over and over again not always to be the case. So I stand 100% behind this statement. But I also believe it's within the ability of every tax professional to explore, discover, learn, and quickly become more sure-footed in this area than they are today. But first, let's unpack the statement a little bit, particularly the one about why the rules of the game are changing so drastically and what this actually looks like. So tax really only has 2 customers, if you want to think about it that way, and both are digitizing at pace. First, the tax authorities, and we've already heard this morning, they're rapidly moving towards live reporting and data-driven regulation. So the live reporting piece means more data in raw format at more speed than ever before. And the data-driven regulation means what the tax authorities are going to be doing with that data once they gather it. And of course, what they're doing is gradually over time building up sophisticated digital profiles of their taxpayers, which means that going forward, compliance is going to mean understanding how your tax position is reflected in data. That is your data and the data that they've collected about you. And of course, that's a big change for the tax function. Second customer, and these aren't in any order, by the way, I don't think one takes precedence over the other, but the second customer is the rest of your organization. So almost every big company out there at the moment is digitizing at pace or digitalizing at pace. So for example, if the name of your company is Acme Limited, you'll probably find that somewhere in your organization there's an initiative called Digital Acme. And one of the aims of that is to compete with maybe one of the existing digital global companies out there like Global, Tesla, Amazon, whatever, or maybe one of the new ones, fintech if you're in the finance space. And of course, what those new digital companies are able to do is really go into the total customer experience space. They're using data for that. So no longer just shifters of goods or supplier of basic services, but they're really all about the total customer experience. And of course, getting the VAT right on invoices is part of that total customer experience. So consequently, the tax group must stand now with the rest of the organization and help them achieve their digital goals, and become a full strategic partner to the rest of the organization and no longer just a back office staff function. By the way, I'm not going to read all these slides, so there's some little quotes up here that I think contain some interesting thought bullets, so please feel free to contact Robert afterwards and get a copy of these slides, and you can work through those yourself. But anyway, all of this is highly disruptive to the traditional tax function. So who are we, PawPaw Taxology, in terms of all of this? So what we do is we ensure tax professionals have the vision, awareness, and artifacts to be free from the impact of digital disruption. So that is free from powerlessness in the face of IT, free from the fire hose of confusing information out there about the way forward, and free from wondering if one day technology and digitalization will dismantle your careers. And for me, there's absolutely no doubt that right now tax is under more and more pressure. And I've even seen it, sadly, actually dismantle one or two careers already. And the big concern, of course, is that this is only just beginning. And I genuinely believe we're just on the cusp of an inflection point now, which is just around the corner, where a firm grasp on technology is no longer a luxury. In fact, it's even more than a requirement. It needs to become part of how we think about ourselves and how we define ourselves as tax groups and tax professionals. But the journey to get there contains many traps and pitfalls, which so far have too often resulted in underachievement with technology, some overspending, disappointment, and frustration, even though not everybody might be willing or ready to admit it or see it in those terms right now. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to Lide to share her experience. So Lide, over to you.
Hi, yes, my name is Lide. I am the VAT manager of Ritchie Brothers for the EMEA region and APAC. And certainly I have struggled understanding why the IT projects of my company were not successful. I was struggling articulating as well my needs to the IT audience, and I didn't have the bigger picture. So, and I also it wasn't very clear to me how I could contribute better to my organization. And definitely this, well, it helps, it feels frustrating and confusing and powerless.
Thank you very much, Lide. Now, I'm aware that Lida's story will not be everybody's story. In fact, we're fully aware that everybody's story is different, but I hope that at least some of what Lide has expressed there resonates with you. And because of that, the first thing that we do when new people come to join us as members, by the way, Lide was, after we revamped our training program last year, Lide was the second person to be newly certified as a functional taxologist. And we will talk more about this a little bit later. But what we do is we offer a certification program and follow-on services such as coaching, additional learning, and networking opportunities. In fact, we're frequently connecting members of this community with each other as they continue to explore this area further. However, we do find it hard to work with people who have not been through the 6-week certification, because we find that without that, we're not necessarily speaking the same language. And we do believe that these changes are so fundamental that it is a different language, and it's underpinned by a different set of concepts, principles, and rules, and without which it's near impossible to really make meaningful progress in this space. Anyway, the first thing we do with new members is hear their story. So some are in-house professionals like Lide, while others are advisors or work for the consultancy firms, and we've even had 1 or 2 people that already call themselves taxologists or tax technologists come to us. But the point is we make sure that we hear your story and your concerns and where you are. And if we don't think that we can help you, then we're more than happy to recommend another approach or somebody else that you can work with. But fortunately for us anyway, it doesn't happen very often. It does sometimes, but not too often. And by the way, of course, don't forget to pop any questions into the questions box there, and we will have a little bit of time to answer those later. However, if Lide's story does not 100% resonate with you, let's try a few other what we regard as symptoms of a digital disconnect. Or another way of putting it is the wishful thinking journey. So the first symptom would be where responsibility for technology and digitalization and tax has been handed over to others. So we still find that some people think that technology and taxes is an IT problem. And all we need is we need better people in IT or O2C or P2P, you know, order to cash, procure to pay for the tax pieces that they're supposed to look after, or the vendors of the technology or the consultants, they need to be better. But in fact, this is really not the case. Under the new co-partnering model, what we're talking about, the responsibility for the tax really does still lie with tax. Or secondly, and we see this quite often, somebody is appointed as a director or senior manager of tax technology, but really without any training. And to be quite frank, these people don't necessarily have a very high success rate. And another symptom of this is when responsibility during a project for, say, VAT solution or tax design, those decisions lie with senior tax professionals who are great tax professionals. But again, to be quite frank, they're not really digital designers or data modelers. So in either case, you know, it just doesn't really work very well. And actually the damage that can be done is quite a lot and is sometimes more than that. Lastly, low or very low expectations of meaningful success. Now, you might have to dig a little bit deep, look inwardly to yourself to see if this is really you, because in general, of course, it's not at all politically expedient to admit that you have low expectations. So sometimes it's carefully concealed, even to yourself. But, you know, it might well be there. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that going forward, well, not even going forward, because actually it's already true today, that nobody can look after technology and digitalization in tax except tax. There may be different skills involved and a new org chart, but it still belongs to tax. And this was true before and does not change now just because tax is now digitized and digitalized. However, if there has been out there a little bit of state of denial about that, which I think there has, there's been a tendency for that, then for me, it's also not too hard to see why this might be. So what would be the reasons for these low expectations? So where do these come from? And often it involves bringing a troubled past into the present. So for example, some tax groups have really been through or bringing with them a distressed legacy from turbulent ERP and other enterprise technology projects in the past. It might be what you call a toxic legacy. Or perhaps there's been an inability to measure success in this space by traditional means. And that actually makes complete sense, because if the way we're measuring ourselves in the transformed way going forward, which is by customer satisfaction scores, then how do we compare this and other qualitative measures against what is the old way of measuring these things, which tend to be quantitative measures, dollar bills, for example? And that is, of course, a key feature of transformation initiatives, which potentially have an even worse track record than ERP projects. So in 2016, Gartner reported an 85% failure rate for transformation initiatives in general. And last year, EY reported a 75% failure rate for tax transformation projects, so transformation in the tax space. Although how they measure those, if you're measuring them by qualitative measures, is quite interesting anyway. But, you know, with these things, if this is the history, then it's easy to see why people are looking to step aside. And just as a bit of an aside at this point, so if we look at the approach that the tax professionals and tax groups have taken to the need for action in this space, well, do we think it's been like the response to COVID, or is it more like the response to climate change? So the response to COVID, if you like, has been relatively swift and dramatic when it showed up, late 2019, early 2020. Governments did react pretty quickly, but climate change, well, we've known that climate change has been out there for decades now, but so far the reaction to it has been slow. The world has dragged its feet in this space. And I think digitalization in tax is actually more like climate change. We've known it's been coming for a long time, but the reaction to it so far has often been sporadic and fragmented. So in our opinion, it's absolutely time to cut to the chase on this and see it for what it really is. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick up on a couple of key concepts here. So the first one, and this is something we call the tax technology lifecycle, and it looks a little bit like this. Oops, too sensitive. So at some point there was a big initiative, and right in the beginning, you know, people thought Big Bang was popular. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but because it was so new, they generally underachieved and missed expectations. But of course, there's a good chance that some of those expectations were a little bit out of whack in the first place. But almost always one of those expectations in the indirect tax space was they wanted to get better data when it came to reporting time. But what tended to happen, and particularly if there was a tax engine involved in this first big initiative, because the tax engine wasn't implemented that way, the data could actually become worse at reporting time. So if they were drowning in data before, they're drowning in even more data afterwards. So the tax group puts a proposal together, goes to their senior leadership to try and get some of these items fixed. But the senior leadership don't want to say yes. They have been generally saying no. The only thing that they've been approving is something that is absolutely an immediate firestorm and has to be fixed straight away. But anything to improve the environment, they've been saying no. And the reason for that is, I mean, it's not necessarily stated or very clear, is because what they're looking for is just looking for something in that presentation that says, we're going to get a different outcome from what we got before, and they're not seeing it. They don't necessarily know what it is, but they have a trust enough in their own instincts that if they see it, they will recognize it. But what's been happening, and originally our tax technology lifecycle circle here only had these first four. So, but what was happening was people were getting stuck here, but now we've added a fifth one because digitalization is moving forward so quickly at the companies and so quickly with the tax authorities that their hand is being forced, and they're having now to move forward with new initiatives. But it doesn't actually mean they're any better off. And some of these initiatives are quite expensive and torturous affairs. So improvements are definitely needed in this space. Secondly, tax is having to reimagine or reinvent itself. So what we had in the past, and I'm talking quickly, I'm going to continue to move quickly to stay on track, is tax business. We had tax business here, and it was populated with tax lawyers and accountants. Excuse me if that's a little bit of a simplification, but I think the overall message from this slide will still come across. The point will still be valid. And what they did was they gave tax advice and consultancy to a business that was at that time still pre-transformed. And transactional information was being extracted by a tax operations group who was principally using Excel Now, Excel in our mind is, and I agree with Ryan who spoke before, but it's an absolutely excellent tool at display and data surfacing. What it's not good is as a data management tool. But nevertheless, they were using it to prepare the data, do the compliance, and do the filings, using periodic submissions to the tax authorities, who were also pre-digital. And if the tax authorities had questions, well, they would come back to one or other part of the tax group. Didn't really matter which with their questions. But the key point here is that there was an opportunity at this point here to actually make corrections to the data, or adjustments, or include some compliance pieces that were not in ERP. Now, with the digitalization of the tax authorities, that's changing. So what is the future going to look like? Well, now we have a tax business that going forward are going to be digitally aware business partners with the rest of the organization. Our tax operations group are going to be digitally enabled and preferably fully data literate. Now, digitally aware and digitally enabled are slightly different. Being digitally aware means you understand the various aspects of digitalization so you can govern it and manage it. Digitally enabled means actually doing it. And you might find that your new style tax function now includes a tax technology, or if you prefer the kind of the agile approach, you would call it a tax technology or a tax engineering group, or even maybe a separate tax data group. And I myself have actually been in departments with these titles at 2 different companies recently, so I know they're there. And now what's happening is our digitally aware tax group is giving tax advice to the company still, but now it's data driven. So their strategic decisions and policy making is based on more data, digital data, to a business that has now more digitally transformed. But now with data driven and live reporting, it's going straight to the authorities without the opportunity to go via the tax operations group. And of course, if the authorities have e-queries or e-audits, well, then that's now going to the new style tax function that we have here. And of course, because we're now digital partners to the rest of the organization, we are co-partnering them and offering guidance, governance, and collaboration in the tax space. So, but again, key point here, and now the data has to be right first time. So if we had a situation over here where actually previously the tax piece, because like we say, those early tax projects or ERP projects, tax was not involved. The ERPs from a tax perspective were not particularly fit for purpose. That is no longer possible. Now, the data has to be right first time. So this is putting a lot of pressure on ERP at source. So, oops. Sorry. Okay. I lost my train of thought there for a second. So I'm hoping that resonates with at least some level with everybody listening, even if you have to dig into yourself a little bit, deep to acknowledge it. And, if you're doing that, I would be interested to know just how long that technology and data in particular has been an issue for you in tax. And I suspect it's a long time, so long that actually it's almost for you become the norm, which is not a good thing because, for a lot of people, it's been going on a long time. And if you really think about it, it's been a major cost to you. So again, I'm going to go back to Lida, and if we'd love you to share your experience in this space, please.
Yes, indeed. In my experience, our systems were just not built for VAT. And sadly, in repeated occasions, we've seen how projects have deployed technology solutions that would simply not deliver the promised benefits.
And what impact did that have on you, Lida?
Well, that had the impact that myself and my role was sidelined, right? We were seen or considered as SMEs whose involvement is only needed in the last phases of a project, right? And that has created fundamental design issues that produce additional manual work and process inefficiencies and too much reliance as well on clerks that don't have tax knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much, Lida. And so what I do is I'm inviting each of you to think about the cost of technology that is just not good enough, cheap enough, or quick enough to implement. And in particular, data that you don't really trust. If not now, then in the near future, when the tax authorities start using their big data techniques, and they use things like pattern recognition, statistical significance, and anomaly detection, to start asking you questions about your own data that you might find very difficult to answer in this new space. And there's another way to think about this as well. So say you had, just imagine you had a very firm grasp on what's happening with the technology, digitalization, transformation, and above all the data. And imagine that your tax data is your bread and butter. It serves you every day. It gives you visibility and transparency into what's happening around your company with relative ease. You would then once again be able to say, great, we're on top and we're back in control. And by the way, this is what we mean. This is what we truly mean by data driven, as opposed to today where many things are still process driven and they're in my mind falling short and not really transformed. And you know, this is our definition of a 21st century tax professional, somebody who really is understanding and using data. And this is where I believe we can truly help you. Now, like I said in the beginning, if none of this resonates with you or you think you already know enough, although personally I kind of think that's more or less impossible because I've been in tax technology for 20 years and 5 years full time now discovering this new space, which is taxology. And I'm still learning new things almost every day. But anyway, if that's your situation, we're really happy to wish you luck. You know, if you feel this is not for you. However, Lida, I would be very grateful if we could ask you again to please describe your experience of our program.
Yeah, so I registered to the program almost a year ago. It took me 2 months to finish it. The program has 5 chapters. It starts with tax codes, which has a very interesting approach to tax codes, but is also really about data. It continues with automation, which everyone wants to know more about, right? The 3rd chapter is smart innovation. It's all about setting the scene and creating a vision for what it looks like a digitally transformed organization. 4th chapter is about projects, because execution is definitely also critical and can also be transformed, actually. And the last chapter is about accounting. It discusses the problem of measuring return on investment and the value of data as well. So the program really starts and ends with data. It really helped me because it opened my eyes to a new way of thinking about technology and digitalization. We had one-on-one sessions for each chapter, and Geoff helped me understand the concepts well and making sure I could also apply it to my specific concerns. Not once did he try to teach me IT. I found it so valuable that I continued working with him, and we've been meeting every week since. And it's really, it's definitely helping me to make a real difference.
So Lida, if I can call on you again, please, to just share your experience of what taking this program has actually meant for you.
Sure. The program well, helped me see that as a tax manager, I can no longer see myself as a customer of the IT department. That's for sure. And it has also helped me achieve, well, broader awareness. It has given me a map, so to speak, enabled me to make a plan as well. And most importantly as well, it has helped me approach my challenges differently, behaving differently.
So in other words, it has changed the way it goes for you, right, Lida? And we are walking the walk and talking the talk along this journey day by day, week by week, and month by month as it goes. So I'm just going to summarize again the kind of people that we like to work with. So we often work with tax professionals and the consultants from mid to large multinational corporations who are frustrated because of the disconnect between the tax department and the IT department is keeping them from doing their jobs to the best of their ability. They want to perform at their highest level of professional excellence and help their company fully reach its digital potential, but know that their lack of proficiency in this area is hindering them. Additionally, they see the authorities collecting more data in more detail and more often than ever before, and are concerned that they will struggle to answer questions about anomalies in that data. They fear the digital deficiencies in their processes that are hidden from view. So that is it from us. Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested to know more, please come and visit us at our coffee table during the breaks. Please give us a thumbs up. No, actually not the thumbs up. Please just stick something in the chat and we'll make sure that we get back to you. And, we have an opportunity to meet during the coffee breaks and we'll follow up with you. And we also have a little free example of our material to give out to you. So on that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoff and Lida. We have a couple of questions for you. One from Melissa Metcalf at LCR Dixon. Our company specializes in pre-developed tools and programs for optimizing tax integrations for VAT with SAP. In general, no matter the ERP or tax engine, where do you see the largest gaps and needs for automation and digitalization? Right.
Actually, for me, the biggest single gap I still see out there is really around data. So, and it's about switching over from the process mindset. So data is still too often seen as just a means to an end within a process, whereas actually really switching over and becoming data-driven means seeing data as a true asset. And one of the problems is measuring that. Of course, data never appears as an asset on a balance sheet, but it really has that value as an asset in its own right with intrinsic value. So I would say the biggest thing we need out there is to actually get the data right first, have that data platform, and then think about the processes secondary. Don't ignore them altogether, of course not. We still have to deal with processes, but processes are a lot easier to think about once you've got the data right. So I would say industry-wide, that is the biggest challenge we are facing right now.
Okay, thank you. Another question here, is the program focused on indirect tax only or all taxes in general, including direct tax and tax reporting?
It does focus on all taxes. And actually, the problems in terms of understanding digitalization for tax with indirect versus direct and even other taxes are quite different, surprisingly different, actually. So, my principal background was indirect, so there is a focus on indirect. And I think indirect has some of the bigger challenges in this space, but we definitely cover direct as well. And even, the different tax types around the world. So the principles apply to sales and use in the US, the Latin American countries, which tend to have a much more automated approach, Europe, Asia Pac, etc.
Okay, what is the difference between a taxologist and a tax professional working in a project team, IT and business?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. I'm going to switch it slightly and say, what's the difference between a taxologist and a tax technologist? So yes, you can be an SME on a project, but to really take part in that project, you have to know more about projects and know more about technology and how it's managed. So, and for that, if you want to be, a lot of people become tax technologists. So for example, if you want to learn how a tax engine works, the Thomson Reuters tax engine, for example, go to Thomson Reuters University, take the courses in indirect tax determination, and you'll learn about the tax engine. But that won't make you a taxologist. So it's a little bit like you can become a plumber, an electrician, or a bricklayer on a building site. But if you're going to build the whole house, you still need an architect who and the customer who wants to live in the house eventually, who's going to actually design and understand how to bring your skills together. And that is what a taxologist is. And it is a different skill set from being a tax technologist and needs to be called out. Too often, actually, that taxology role is in people's don't know they need space, unfortunately. But we're working hard to change that.
One final question. When you do not own or control data, for example, master data, how do you manage data as an issue? Do you create a tax data hub or look at an ETL tool?
So the whole issue of data tax ownership for me can be quite dangerous. And it's one of the things I mentioned in one of the slides why people are sometimes looking to step aside. But tax belongs to tax, right? And that still means that the tax relevant data elements. So a very simple example, take the customer master. Now the customer master record does not belong to tax. That's clear. In fact, that one belongs to the whole organization or a separate data organization on behalf of the whole organization because so many different people use it. But there are nevertheless attributes on there that do belong to tax. The registration, for example, a tax classification code, for example, and there's no real way to escape it, but you own that. As a tax group, you own that. Now, you may not have the data modeling knowledge necessary to really know how to govern it, but it's still yours. So this is what the program does. We help you understand that. We help you create the vision around that so at least you know what steps to take that ownership and take it properly.
Okay.
There was, I think, one quick question from Anna from Nestle in the chat box, I think.
Hold on. Okay, with this approach, are the functions not going to feel like working in silos after years working in IT and tax? My successes have always been when working tax and IT as one team, getting all the skills together and complementing each other.
No, absolutely the opposite. It's not silos at all. I mean, tax still has to do their piece, but it's always within the context of being partners or co-partners with the rest of the organization. So, and this really encourages that and actually shows you some of the mechanisms how to make that happen. So, no, I think it's quite the opposite. And I'd be interested to discuss with you, Anna, why you feel that's the message we were giving across, because it was really not the intention. So perhaps come and meet us at the coffee table afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Geoff and Lide, for your time today.